regarding the intention, the kavanah of sitting in the sukkah. So in general, there's a big debate in the Gemara and in the Poskim, the later commentaries, whether mitzvah tzricha kavanah, ain't tzricha kavanah, does a mitzvah need kavanah, intention, or it doesn't need intention, if there's a difference between a mitzvah min HaTorah or a mitzvah that's only b'derabbanan from the sages. With regards to Sukkos, there's a Chidush, there's a novelty that the Bach brings down, which is that even if, according to the opinion that we don't need specific intention, of course we need general intention to understand a little bit what we're doing, to know that we're doing a mitzvah. But with regards to Sukkos, sitting in the Sukkah, we must have intention. And it's part of the mitzvah itself. It's part of the command itself. Part of performing the mitzvah itself is that we must have intention. We must have kavanah. As the pasuk in fact says, "L'man yedek b'sukkos yishavti," that we should know that the reason we should sit in the sukkah is so that we should know, we should have awareness, we should have conscious awareness that we sat in the sukkah when we left Mitzrayim, when we left Egypt. So the mitzvah is that we have to make sure that when we sit in the sukkah, we also understand why we're doing it. Maybe this is also a mitzvah with regards to tefillin, the same idea. But in general, it doesn't say that you have to, do this particular mitzvah, so you should know. But with sukkahs it does. So therefore, there's a mitzvah to know. Why do we sit in the sukkah? So the pasuk says, the verse says, because we sat in the sukkah when we left Egypt. Which sukkahs are we referring to? What is the idea of a sukkah that we sat in a sukkah? So this is famously an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. In our version of Gemara, in the Gemara Sukkot Yalaf, the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's symbolic of the Anani HaKavod. The Sukkos means something that's covering over, like the Kruvim were Soichim al Aron, they were covering over, hovering over the ark. So the idea of Sukkah is to something that's hovering, something that's covering, that's surrounding. So Rabbi Eliezer says this refers to Anani HaKavod, the clouds of glory, which these are the clouds of glory that were in the journey, the 40-year journey. They were present throughout the 40-year journey. Whether these are the clouds that returned on the 15th day of Sukkot, as the Gemara writes in Shir Hashirim, that these are returning clouds of glory because they left with the story of the golden calf, and then they returned on the 15th day because 3 days after they started building the Mishkan, etc. Whether this is the idea, but either way, this represents the clouds of glory. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says that these refer to Sukkos mamish, that refers to literal booths. That when we left Mitzrayim, we sat in literal booths as we journeyed through the 40-year desert. Now, famously, one of the questions are, there were various different miracles that occurred in the 40-year journey. For example, the Be'er Shem Miriam, the well that we had water from water throughout our journey in the merit of Miriam, and the manna and the man and the breath from heaven that we had that sustained us for the 40 years. And the third thing was also the Anani HaKavod, which came in the honor and the merit of Aaron HaKohen, of Aaron. So why do we signal out only the Anani HaKavod? It's interesting that in our version of the Gemara, in our version of the Talmud, it's Rabbi Akiva who says Sukkos mamish. It's Rabbi Akiva who says literal Sukkos. And Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says that it's the Anani HaKavod, it's the clouds of glory. But if you look at the Sifra and also in the Mechilta, it's the opposite. It's Rabbi Akiva who is the one who says that it's Sukkos, that the Sukkah, sitting in the Sukkah is for the Anani HaKavod. This seems a little bit more consistent. Number one, because generally the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva. The halacha follows Rabbi Akiva and the law follows Rabbi Akiva. And the predominant reason why we sit in the Sukkah is to remember the clouds of glory. And besides, there's a principle whenever there's an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, like Tosfos brings down in Sotah Chavdal and other places, that generally Rabbi Akiva is the one that generally interprets the Torah in a more interpretive way, in a metaphorical way, and Rabbi Shmuel reads it more in a literal way, in a literal way. This is a general argument between these two. Rabbi Tzvi Hoffman has a long arichas about this also. But this is the root of this isn't already in a taisus, so it would be more consistent to say that it's Rabbi Akiva who says that it's the clouds of glory. Either way, this is the two opinions. Now, another famous question that's asked, the Torah brings us down the beginning of when he codifies laws of Sukkos. The Torah brings down this famous question, which Evan Ezer already asks, is if we're talking about the Sukkos that we left in Mitzrayim, that when we left in Egypt, these are the Sukkos that we sat when we left in Egypt. But didn't we leave Egypt on Pesach, in Nisan, in the first month of the year? And this is 7 months later, this is the month of Tishrei. So why do we celebrate the celebration of Sukkot that we sat, whether in the literal booths or in Anani Akav, but certainly a question if we sat in the literal booths, the Sukkot Mamash, why don't we celebrate sitting in the Sukkah on Pesach? We should sit in the Sukkahs for Pesach. And the Torah brings a reason, because the weather, so it's a more pleasant weather, so people think that we're going out because it's just like a gazebo, people are going out because of the warmer weather. The Evan Ezer writes that the reason is because they left in Nisan, which is in the warmer months. In the warmer months, they slept in the open fields, in the open desert. But when it turned into the fall in Tishrei, when the months got colder, that's when if Sukkos is Sukkos Mamish, literal Sukkos, that's when they built Sukkos. This is what the Evan Ezer answers. A question that could be asked on all interpretations, certainly when talking about that idea is the Sukkah, the literal Sukkah, is since when do people sit in Sukkos, in booths, in the desert? When people are in the desert, they sit in the oil, they sit in a tent, not in a booth, in a Sukkah. In fact, when the Torah speaks about the journey of Klal Yisrael through the desert, or for an example where Bilam is blessing the Klal Yisrael, Yaakov, he talks about the oil of Yaakov, the tents of Yaakov, the oil moed. These are tents, not sukkahs. Just very practical. You pitch a tent. You don't build a sukkah. So there's a fascinating interpretation from that the Chai Adam brings down, but the root of this idea really is found clearly in the Rokeach, the Relazev Gamais, and the Rokeach writes very clearly, and it's based on a pasuk in Shmuel, and he writes where it speaks in Shmuel that they sat when they were conquering the land of Canaan. Klal Yisrael entered into the land of Eretz Yisrael. When they were conquering the land, the sukkahs, these booths, were army barracks really, and that would make sense. You don't pitch a tent, but if you're about to conquer a place, you build a proper structure to hold the soldiers. And he says that when it says when it says that we left Egypt and Hashem put us in the sukkahs, and we're talking about literal sukkahs, we're referring to the sukkahs that Klal Yisrael sat in the Milchama, in the war of Sichon and Og, which is the beginning of the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. This is a tremendous novel approach, interpretation, which Sukkos Mamish means, literal Sukkos, but it doesn't mean in the desert for the 40 years. It means at the end of the 40 years, as they're about to enter Eretz Yisrael. Pshat in the pasuk is a little complicated because how could the pasuk say already in Vayikra, which is many years before, and it says over there that we have to sit in the sukkahs because we sat in the sukkahs when we left Mitzrayim, but we're talking about 40 years later. At the end, this is the end of the journey. This is the end of the Torah, the end of the 40 years. So it's complicated, but it's a very interesting idea, because what this actually says, what it means that we sat in the sukkahs as we left Mitzrayim, as we left Egypt. What this means is, and this will also answer the question, if we understand what this means, we'll also answer the question, why do we need two Yom Tovim? Why do we need two celebrations? If the idea is to remember the miracles, which some of the Taz, some of the commentators place can write, that the reason why we don't remember the other things is because we're not really remembering the miracle itself of the clouds of glory, or that we sat in booths, but it's to remind us of the going out of Egypt. So the basic question is, why do we need two Yom Tovim? Why do we need two celebrations, two 7th-day, 8-day full celebrations of celebrating the going out of Egypt? We left Egypt, so that's one process. So why do we need two celebrations? According to the Rokeach, it makes sense, because what we're saying is that there are two ideas in the going out of Egypt. The first idea is the release from the negative place, that we were in bondage, and we were released from bondage. That's a freedom from the state of constriction, from the state of avdus, from the state of slavery. And that's why, because Pesach represents the going out of Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we celebrate the going out of Mitzrayim. So therefore, we have these two ideas, which means we start from the constriction. We talk about avodah me'inu, that we were slaves, or that we're also spiritually enslaved. The two ideas are Rav and Shmuel, whether physical enslavement or spiritual enslavement. We eat more the bitter herbs. We eat things that represent the idea of slavery. We dip the karpas, even to remind us, according to Dargos Maimonides, the idea of the Mechiras Yosef, the slave, the Yosef being sold into slavery, which is the root of all slavery, and the root of all anti-Semitism, according to Rabbi Chana Wasserman. The idea of exploring the idea of the negative, the gnus, and then talking about leaving slavery, which is the first stage. But then there's a deeper level of freedom, because freedom is not achieved by just eliminating the negative. When a person is in a bad situation, in a negative situation, maybe it's in a relationship or a job or in life, they're in a constricted place, or internally in their avodah, in their spiritual life, just releasing oneself from the negativity does not necessarily translate into positivity. It just means that you don't have the negation. You're just negating the negative, but you don't necessarily have the positive. So freedom is not just achieved by eliminating the negative forces, by getting rid of the oppression. True freedom, inner freedom, and collective freedom is achieved when there's a choice in something else. Not just we're no longer oppressed, but we're choosing a way of life. It's a freedom to something. It's a freedom to live. This is what we're celebrating. That's why there are two Yom Tovim, and this fits much stronger, much more consistent, and much more aligned with the idea what the Rokeach is saying, is that in the 40-year journey, we were still leaving Egypt. These were stages of leaving Mitzrayim. The 42 journeys, like the Eil Masois, that like the Baal Shem Tov says, that the 42 journeys of Klal Yisrael through Mitzrayim is leaving deeper levels and more subtle levels of restriction to higher levels of freedom. But then true freedom is reached when we reach a certain destination. That we're not just freedom from, but we're freedom to. When we're going into Eretz Yisrael, when we're going into the land of Eretz Yisrael, into the land of Israel, that is when we achieve proper freedom, not just freedom from, but freedom to. And that's when we celebrate these two Yom Tovim, these two separate holidays, two separate celebrations. One is the 7 days, which we talk about, and therefore we talk about also the negative. And Sukkot, which also represents the going out of Mitzrayim, but the second stage of going out of Mitzrayim, the second stage of going out of Egypt, therefore it doesn't talk about the negative. On Purim we don't eat, on Sukkot we don't eat mar, we don't speak about the gnus, we don't speak about the negative, we only talk about the freedom, because it's the second stage of freedom where we become a people. And this is the idea of entering into Eretz Yisrael. That's the higher level of freedom, that's the higher level of what Sukkot represents. So, on some level, and here it gets a little bit more subtle and more delicate. On some level, the idea of going into Sukkah, and this is why the Sukkah is representative and metaphorically represents the place of the Beis HaMikdash. Harachim, we say, Yakamon, Sukkos David Hanifelas, who should elevate the Sukkah that fell, which is the building of the Beis HaMikdash. The Sukkah represents the place of the Beis HaMikdash, the place of the temple, the place of Eretz Yisrael, the place of Geula, the place of redemption. And when an individual person walks into their Sukkah, their small little Sukkah, their carved out space, there's a place that I'm holding for you, that we spoke many times, that there's a place, every person has a makom, every person has their place, and their essential place, collectively, our collective place, is a makom, which is the place of the Mizbeach, the place of the Beis HaMikdash, the place of the Even Shasiyah, the place of the essential nakuda of all space. That's the makkah, and therefore because that's our space. Therefore it brings about the joy of returning to space, the joy of finding ourselves, finding our home, finding the place that we belong. Then on Sukkos, the idea of Sukkos, and this is parallel to the idea incidentally also with Pesach. the Pesach, like the Maharsha brings on, and the Megillah, which says that about the Midrashish Bavel, that eventually all the shuls and places of learning will enter into Eretz Yisrael. The Maharsha said will become part of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore, when you're sitting in a shul, in a carved out place of sacred space, in a synagogue, in a place of learning, in a Beis Medrash, what you're doing, you're sitting in the Makom HaMikdash. You're sitting in a part that is part of the Beis HaMikdash, part of Eretz Yisrael. Some Sofer says this is true with every seder that a person makes. There's a carving out of that particular place, and that bias that becomes now part of the structure of the ultimate Beis HaMikdash. So the idea of Sukkos, let's go back to the idea of Sukkos, is the space, which we spoke a few times, that because Yom Kippur represents the time of tshuva, and tshuva is a transformation and a letting go of self, a letting go of negative patterns of behavior, the kol nidra, of emptying ourselves from all constrictions, all limitations, all things that are tethering us to things that are negative, freeing ourselves. And therefore Yom Kippur represents this time when we're luftmensch, we're ethereal, we're angelic, we're no longer tied to the material world, to the physical world, no longer tied to the shallow and superficial identities that we have within ourselves. That's the idea of Purim, of Yom Kippur. So then because of that state, and because the idea of tshuva, like the Sfas Emes writes, is connected to the words of toyu v'toyu, which has the letters of toyu, of confusion, of chaos, of uncertainty. Rabbi Yaakov also brings this down, that the idea of tshuva means that I'm no longer that old self, and I can't find myself any longer. So I'm not the old, but who am I? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us on Sukkot, I have a place for you. Come into my place. Come into my Beis HaMikdash. Come into my sacred place. Come into my place of Geula. My place of Eretz Yisrael. The small nakuda even within Chutz La'aretz, even within and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Come and find yourself and build yourself up in this place. To find yourself again. To find your bias. To find your makam. To find your place. That's on the one hand. So that's almost like the permanence within the impermanence of creation. The place of Hashem, that Hashem is the space that allows us to find our space within this world. And yet, it's also brought down. The Pele Yoetz brings us down, and others bring it down, that the idea of a sukkah is really also an expression of galus, an expression of a practice of going into galus, of going into exile. That a person is in their home throughout the year, in their security, in their place of security, and after Yom Kippur, if Chas v'Shalom, a person is needed for galus, a person has to practice and step of refinement, and part of the refinement is to go into a place of galus, to go into a place of exile, to be alienated from their essential place. So we tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say, Hashem, we're going to go out into the wilderness. We're going to practice on our own this practice of galus, this practice of exile, of separation, of separating from our diras kavah, from the place of our home that's solid and confirmed and defined. We're going to go out into that place. So the sukkah both represents, like we said before, the place of going into Eretz Yisrael, the place of finding our security and finding our space, finding our makam, finding our bias, finding our place of permanence. And yet it's also represents the place of the impermanence, of the exile, when things are not in its exact location, when things are not exactly aligned. And the truth is, what it's trying to tell us on a very deep level, by going into a structure, which is the makom of the Beis HaMikdash, the place of the Beis HaMikdash, and yet that space that we're going into is flimsy, with flimsy walls, with walls that are temporary, with schach that can fly off the roof, with a roof that's penetrable, that's porous, that rain falls through, that the elements are always present within the space. It's telling us that in the deepest level, we have to recognize that where is our true home? Our true home is only with the only thing that is permanent in this world, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Creator, which is the Master of the universe, which is Hashem. That all the structures that we build in this world, and all the things that we create for ourselves, and all the spaces that we physically create for ourselves, that is not truly our home. There is the physical location of home, and of course, when a person has a home, a person doesn't have a home. The Gemara says, But The deeper reading is that it's karka for a purpose of home, like Tzemach Tzedek writes. The idea of if a person doesn't have a home, a place to go, a place to feel comfortable with, and the person's not complete, doesn't feel himself whole. And the deepest level is that we're saying that it's not actually a physical location. That the real bias, the real home, the real space that we feel on home with is in the presence of Hashem. That's the ultimate home. That's the ultimate makam, humakam shalom. That's the ultimate space. So we build structures telling ourselves that this is a structure, but ultimately what the structure is saying is that this is a divine hug. This is represented the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the four letters of the name Hashem, the four Sukkah. The Sukkah is Gemachia Yoshem Hashem and Hashem Adonai, the names of Hashem, Sukkah with a Vav. And the whole idea is that we're enveloped with the divine presence. And that's the ultimate awareness, that throughout life, wherever we are in this world, whether you're in a physical location and you find your space and you find your home, whether you're not in a physical location that you're not finding your home, you should know that ultimate home is the place where you truly are at one with Hashem. That's the ultimate home. Hima Mokim is iti, the place that is really with me. When I'm with Hashem, when a person is connected to Hashem, that is the ultimate home, and that is the ultimate place of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's the ultimate Geula, that's the ultimate redemption. And the redemption could be even with a place of exile. And it's not local, it's not localized, it's not a particular location. If I'm in this place, I feel at home. And if I'm not in this place, I don't feel at home. And if I'm in my physical home, my physical space that I actually have, I carved out this physical space and I have this space. And when I enter in that place, that's when I fully feel alive and I fully feel joy, because that's Mekoimi, that's my place. And Oiz V'Chever Mekoimi, and joy is found in my space. Comes along Sukkah and says the real the real place of joy is recognizing that our true home is the place of being one with Hashem. Is being the dir b'tachtonim, being in the place of the dir of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being in the place of a divine home. Yesh balabais l'birazu, there's a home and it's Hashem's home, and we recognize that we're being in Hashem's home, we're being in the Creator's home. That is the place that we're home, and we're always home then. There's no place that we go that we don't feel at home, because we're always at home in this world, because we're always connected to Hashem. And that's the higher level of living. So even if we're in Gullus physically, we're not in our physical place that we feel comfortable generally with. And we're going out into the elements, or we're traveling, or we're not in our space. But when a person is connected to Hashem, and connected to the roots, and connected to the true home of being at home in the divine space, then every place that they go, they're at home. And every place that they go, they feel their joy. And every place that they go, they feel comfortable and holy and held. And this is the highest level of Sukkos, and that's why it's the ultimate joy. Just to conclude with a cute little story, and not cute, but it's a very deep story. The Tzemach Tzedek once was a chassid, was a disciple of the Tzemach Tzedek, wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael, wanted to travel to the physical location of Eretz Yisrael. And the Tzemach Tzedek told him, Machda Eretz Yisrael, you should make here Eretz Yisrael, which means you should find the Nekuda of Kedusha, the Nekuda of holiness, sacredness, of connectivity, of Dveikus, even when you're in exile, physically, not in the space where you want to be. They say that my grandfather, great-grandfather, Zal Moshe, the famous chassid, that when he came from the boat from Europe, and he finally arrived in Eretz Yisrael, the physical location of Eretz Yisrael, this is in the early 1930s, and he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, he turned to, and the people came to greet him by the port. And when he came, he came into Eretz Yisrael, and he obviously entered into the Chidush of Eretz Yisrael, and he told his chassidim that were surrounded there, he says, now we have to first start to begin with, and really make here Eretz Yisrael. Even if you're on a physical location, you think that that's the location, and I'm physically in that space, and there's a Chidush of Eretz Yisrael, and I'm good. But the real work is not the physical location. The real work is, even in the physical location, whether you're in a physical location, Eretz Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz, to be connected to the inner quality of Eretz Yisrael, to connect to the inner quality of Kedusha, the inner quality of Humakay Mishalayim, the inner quality where it's Hashem's place. And therefore, Eretz Yisrael will be expanded throughout the entire world, because every place has that Nekuda of Eretz Yisrael, every place has that Nekuda of Humakay Mishalayim. And the Sukkah, the idea of sitting in the Sukkah, is to recognize we're always connected, we're always whole, we're always at home.